Okay, we're back now for the second part of chapter 5. I want to make some clarifications with horticulture and agriculture because there's been some arguments whether or not horticulture should be seen as a distinctive adaptive strategy. I think the argument has come down that it is at least a stepping stone to agriculture. Uh, but this notion of step-like fashion, going from an early stage to the next stage in sort of a step-like fashion, it can be problematic. So we have to be careful because many of your hunting and gathering societies simply adapted cultivation along with their hunting and gathering. They didn't stop hunting and gathering. That continued, but they amended their mode of production by adding on horticulture, for example. So, and also, even after agriculture was developed in parts of the world and well on its way, many societies around the world still practiced horticulture. So there's a sort of blending of these in reality, though we do separate them for analytical reasons. But to distinguish horticulture is a lot like our modern day gardening, just like your grandmother has a garden in the backyard. It's pretty similar to that. Also, it's similar to some other practices in a rural county like Robinson County. What really distinguishes horticulture is called the slash and burn technique of cultivation. And slash and burn is basically where you take a plot of land, you slash the foliage or the forest if there is some, and burn it off, and then you allow that ash to act as a kind of fertilizer. Then you're using a simple digging stick, as you'll see on page 94. Just a simple digging tool allows for to churn up the soil and then plant the seeds, pretty much like we do in our backyard gardens. And then the way horticulture works is very environmentally adaptive. Usually the tribes were maybe semi-nomadic. Some were more settled than others. And then they would tend to go in a large circle area where they would slash and burn. They would exploit that land for a few years until the soil was exhausted. Then they would allow the term allowed to lay fallow. So the soil is allowed to grow back up. Meanwhile, they move on to the next plot, slash and burn it, and then and use that land for a few seasons until the soil is exhausted. Then they let it allow it to lie fallow and move on to the next. And they may go into a large circle of several miles, and at some point they'll return back to where they originally started. And by that time, that foliage has grown back up, and they just start the process over again. So it's very, very adaptive ecologically. One thing they're very unique is that they did not horticulturists did not use the land in an intensive manner. Labor's not intensive. They don't use machinery. There's no irrigation. There's just this slash and burn technique. So it's very adaptive. And as I said before, many times many of your southeastern Native American tribes, for example, were hunting and gatherers, but then later became added on horticulture. And so many times when we find artifacts in the area, we'll find examples of the small hoe heads chipped out of stone that were utilized as a hoe to cultivate their gardens, while at the same time still hunting and still fishing, still gathering as well. Agriculture is a different, we think of agriculture as sort of a really big watershed in human history, and we relate, if we think about the one invention that made agriculture possible, we think of the plow, right? But also the beginning of the domestication of animals like oxen that were utilized for pulling the plow, also using their dung for fertilizer. Also, there was the invention of irrigation. Also, in the hillier countries, we call it terracing. You've seen photos of mountains where people live, mountain people, where it looks like steps in the mountains, right? That's called terracing. And so, there's costs. There's some costs and some benefits to agriculture. One of the benefits is that it allows us to use the same tracts of land continuously. So we use the same land because of the ability to fertilize, to irrigation. We could use large tracts of land over and over again. Now, this makes it possible to really have a large surpluses. It allowed for human societies to begin to become more sedentary, settle down. People were for the first time able to, their labor was freed up to do other things besides worry about food, as they began to build up surpluses. So you see a more complex social and cultural development with agriculture, larger cities, right? And then later, you have the development of agricultural empires like Egypt and others. And another feature of agriculture, as I said before, is it tends to produce a lot of social inequality, and that after a while, in simple fashion, someone may claim ownership to large tracts of land. They have access to seeds, and for the first time, they may actually have people work for them. So the notion of peasants working the land for someone else in return for maybe a plot of land to grow their own crops or food stuff or animals, or even for pay, for money. And over time, this produced a society where we found a lot of extreme social inequality. For example, in the United States, the agricultural period, the two main factors of agriculture is large tracts of land and labor. Having a lot of folks out there doing that back-breaking kinds of work. And if you look at our three major racial minority groups in the United States, their minority group status began in the agriculture period in the United States. So with the agriculture period, say in the southern U.S., you had these large plantations. You needed to have some types of coerced slave labor, and this was the beginning of the minority group status for African Americans. You needed large tracts of land, and as we began to expand westward, Native Americans were there on the land, and this caused a conflict over scarce resources. And so land and the competition over land led to eventually, not at the beginning, but eventually, the development of a minority group status for Native Americans. Same thing happened in the Southwest with Mexican Americans. So I find these two adaptive strategies, horticulture and agriculture, do have distinctive features, and so I wanted to make sure that you ferret those out, and then look at the others, pastoralism and then industrialism, in the same fashion, and make sure that you come to grips with how to identify them simply by their unique characteristics of each of these. Alrighty, see you next time for Chapter 7.